Even as the first Batman was being made, the studio approved plans for the trilogy.
I didn't have any intention of making a sequel, and I was quite surprised finding myself wanting to do it. I just got caught up in the process of imagining how you would see a character like the Joker, through the prism of what we did in the first film.
After the success of their previous work, Christopher invited his brother to write the screenplay. Together, they decided that the text should be based on the original Batman comics and asked Jerry Robinson for help. He is the man historians call the creator of the Joker. Christopher envisioned his antagonist prototype being based on the main character of the Testament of Dr. Mabuse, while Fritz Lang's work was the source of the inspiration for the main character.
Die Augen, die leben einförmlich.
The film inherited its main idea from the criminal thriller Heat. Specifically, The Black Knight borrowed the idea of the relationship between the main characters, two irreconcilable heroes who are at the same time very similar to each other.
I do what I do best. I take scores. You do what you do best, trying to stop guys like me.
William Fichtner was even offered a role because of his work in Michael Mann's thriller.
Sure, you got a deal.
You have any idea who you're stealing from? You and your friends are dead!
He's out, right?
The masks which the robbers use are a connection to Stanley Kubrick's debut film, The Killing. When writing The Dark Knight, the Nolans avoided using most of their typical moves, like flashbacks, time jumps, or even riddles. They showed the audience who is behind the villains at the very beginning.
I'll look into it.
Instead of an increasingly suspenseful narrative, the story focuses on the psychology of the characters.
I have enough blood on my hands. And I've seen now what I would have to become to stop men like him.
Of course, in order for this to work, the actors had to be perfectly chosen, so the casting was vital to the movie's success. Warner Brothers was able to keep all of the actors from the first film, except for Katie Holmes, who wanted to take part in the crime comedy Mad Money.
So why not?
Why not seems like a really bad reason to do something, don't you think?
Why?
It was thought her role would go to Emily Blunt or Rachel McAdams, but eventually it was given to Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Did you mean it?
Yes.
The switch didn't particularly bother fans, but Maggie recounts that she was initially frightened by the scope of the blockbuster and the extreme stunts, since she had only starred in smaller independent films.
Are you all right?
Let's not do that again.
Before the release of Batman Begins, David Goyer had planned on dedicating a film each to the Joker and Harvey Dent. But after the Nolan brothers combined them into one film, they had to find two equally incredible actors simultaneously. The director wanted the district attorney to be played by Matt Damon, but was unable to convince him because he decided to act in Steven Soderbergh's The Informant.
I did the right thing.
Hugh Jackman was interested in the role, but after seeing Thank You for Smoking, Christopher realized that Harvey could be perfectly played by Aaron Eckhart, who reminded the director of a young Robert Redford.
Things are worse than ever.
Yes, they are. But the night is darkest just before the dawn.
The actor had wanted to play in Nolan's film 8 years prior in Memento, and agreed without even reading the script.
Okay, fine. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Aaron based his persona on Robert Kennedy, whose career and thirst for revenge reminded him of Harvey Dent.
Mr. Dent, how does it feel to be the biggest hero in Gotham?
No, I'm no hero. Gotham's finest, they're the heroes.
David Goyer, by the way, always maintained that Harvey was the main character of The Dark Knight.
Just tell me it's not Wayne, the guy's a complete...
What are you doing?
As for the Joker, Christopher had chosen the actor 3 years earlier. From their first meeting, he planned to invite Heath Ledger to the cast, and after seeing Brokeback Mountain, couldn't imagine anyone else.
Such a lack of vanity. This was an actor who wasn't afraid to bury himself in his character to a massive extent. Yes, people were perplexed at my choice, but it was the easiest decision of my directing career.
Me?
Surprisingly, when the film was announced, the press judged Christopher's choice to be unfortunate, especially since Robin Williams, Paul Bettany, Adrian Brody, and Steve Carell had all shown public interest in the role.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Nolan spoke to all the candidates, but their manners seemed to imitate Jack Nicholson's, whose performance is considered to be iconic.
I'm crying. You might join me for a week.
Ledger, on the other hand, presented a fresh interpretation.
Let her go.
Very poor choice of words.
To get in character, he spent 2 weeks locked in a hotel room, developing his speech.
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Go back to ripping off mob dealers? No.
Movement and gesticulation.
Well, hello, beautiful. You must be Harvey Squeeze.
The actor drew inspiration from Alex of A Clockwork Orange and from members of the Sex Pistols.
But now, we're facing a cheapskate comedy interrogation act, and it just ain't on, pal. It's a joke. It's a farce.
Why don't you give me a call when you want to start taking things a little more seriously? Here's my card.
His famous way of licking his lips was something discovered on set. Intricate makeup, including the silicone scar, was always threatening to slide off into his mouth. The slight swish of the tongue would return it to its place.
Their code. It's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble.
The idea for the makeup was derived from Eric Draven from the cult film The Crow. And the artist Connor O'Sullivan based the actual scars on real photos of people who wore the Glasgow smile. In the movie, the Joker shares 2 legends about the origin of the cuts.
Well, you look nervous. Is it the scars? You want to know how I got these scars? So I had a wife, beautiful, like you. My father was a drinker and a fiend. Who tells me I worry too much? Who tells me I ought to smile more? He comes at me with the knife. Why so serious? I just want to see her smile again. I just want her to know that I don't care about the scars. He sticks the blade in my mouth. Let's put a smile on that face.
Chris added these lines to the screenplay in order to underline the fact that the Joker doesn't actually have a backstory. He represents the power of pure anarchy.
Chaos. I'm an agent of chaos.
Ledger amazed every member of the cast. Bale was shocked by the interrogation scene when Heath asked Christian to hit him with all his strength.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy.
In the finale, when the Joker had already named the addresses, Batman hits him a few more times. Nolan used this moment to show that the hero had lost his sense of right and wrong and committed an act of senseless violence. But during editing, the last few shots were left out, so as not to make it seem that Batman himself had turned evil.
To them, you're just a freak. Like me.
Even when the experienced Michael Caine met the Joker for the first time, he was genuinely frightened. According to the script, he was to be greeting guests at the elevator, when instead of a bunch of moneybags, a gang of clowns entered. The butler forgot all his lines.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Before Ledger was cast, Caine tried to convince Nolan to choose a different villain because he feared no one would be able to get out from under Nicholson's shadow. However, when Chris told him who would be playing the part, Caine predicted that the world would receive a new movie icon.
This is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
Christopher controlled every aspect of the picture. It was all the more surprising, therefore, that he entrusted Ledger with the shooting of the scenes depicting the torture of the Batman impersonators.
People will die. Starting tonight. I'm a man of my word.
Ledger brought many improvisations to the picture, from the applause in the jail cell, which the filming crew almost missed, to his reaction to the hospital explosion. There is a legend that during the explosion, the detonator truly didn't go off. Heath's improvisation turned a failed take, which could have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, into a moment of genius. Chris insisted that the explosion be real, so they used a deserted chocolate factory, which the producers spent over half a year looking for, before it was destroyed. Decorators turned the factory into Gotham General. However, a few days before shooting, the set was robbed of all its top-floor windows. In order to cover that up, Nolan had to add CGI, despite all his best efforts to avoid it. But let's go back a few months. The casting and set were finished by the middle of April 2007, but during the first 3 days of filming, the team didn't shoot a single take. Instead of working on set, Nolan held a movie marathon where he presented the films which were to set the tone for The Black Knight. Included in the lineup were Heat, Citizen Kane, A Clockwork Orange, Stalag 17, and Batman Begins. What followed was a 6-month filming marathon, with stints in the US, UK, and Hong Kong. Nolan's obsession with live action reached its peak in The Dark Knight. CGI was only used to enhance the viewer's experience, but wild chases, explosions, and fight scenes were created by an incredible team of pyrotechnics and stunt coordinators. Now a little about IMAX. The Batman sequel was the first feature film that was partially shot on these cameras.
No one knew whether you could shoot action sequences in IMAX, because if you think about it, IMAX is generally a couple of penguins walking across a snowfield.
Before, these machines were only used in documentaries about nature and the universe.
But if you want that quality, you want that immersiveness, if you have the vision and you want to do it, it's difficult but not impossible, and he wanted to do it.
They were rarely used for movies because of their loudness, weight, expensive film, and lengthy development time. Christopher is completely anti-digital cameras and was used to waiting a day to see the result of his work. But it took 5 whole days to develop IMAX film. It also took over 15 kilometers of reel to get 28 minutes, which made the final cut.
It's about 9 times bigger, so that's why you get incredible resolution in the IMAX format.
The $185 million budget allowed Nolan to pay for any whim, but there were still unexpected expenses. While shooting the Joker's chase, stuntmen broke one of the 4 existing IMAX cameras in the world, which cost $500,000.
All you care about is money. This town deserves a better class of criminal.
As for innovation, Christopher insisted that most of the Batman's recognizable traits be upgraded. Though a new suit is an obvious choice, it appeared out of a desire to contemporize the design.
It'll be lighter, faster, more agile. Perhaps you should read the instructions first.
For the same reason, Wayne Tower was changed and resulted in a totally new retreat for the superhero. The cave was lit by 800 bulbs, which used 1.5 megawatts.
Oh yes.
After 6 months of shooting, the movie went to the editing stage, where it spent another 6 months. The soundtrack is especially impressive. and the result of much experimenting by Hans Zimmer.
I didn't want to write a summer blockbuster, happy, indulgent score. I wanted something that was truly provocative and people could truly hate.
James Newton Howard composed a sparkling piece of music for Harvey Dent, which purposefully contrasted with Two-Face.
I promise you, the dawn is coming.
The scenes with the Joker include piano strings being played by razor blades.
I was trying to get it down to the most minimal thing that could say exactly what I wanted to say.
Whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
And the guitar being played by pieces of metal.
Now I see the funny side. Now I'm always smiling.
Heath Ledger's fans and family members around the world are in a state of shock. The 28-year-old Oscar nominee was found dead in the New York City apartment he rented on Tuesday.
Of course, the unexpected death of Heath Ledger eclipsed any interest in the shooting process. This terrible event has been discussed for over a decade, and it's worth shedding some light on the situation and dissolving the popular myths. Heath was not using the Stanislavski method, wasn't writing diaries in the Joker's name, and wasn't suffering from depression while filming. His colleagues often remember seeing him in a wonderful mood, and can recount many funny stories with him.
He was so confident, he was so proud of that role. He was really excited for that film to come out.
The actor's parents confirm this as well. His sister, meanwhile, insists that despite his history with drugs, the overdose on sleeping pills was an accident, as he truly had pervasive insomnia. It's not worth picking at the details of the subject. Better to rejoice at the opportunity to bask in the genius of the talented actor.
For any of us lucky enough to work with him, I think for any of us lucky enough to enjoy his performances, he will be eternally missed, but he will never be forgotten.
The movie was dedicated to the memory of Heath Ledger and Conway Wycliffe, a stuntman who, while rehearsing a chase scene with the Joker, crashed and died because of his wounds. The film premiered on the 17th of July, 2008. In the 6 days, The Dark Knight reaped more profit than its predecessor, and by the end of its box office return, it had made more than $1 billion. This was a record for a DC screen adaptation, and the highest-grossing film at the box office overall that year. It was nominated for 8 Oscars, but luck turned her back on Nathan Crowley's set design and Wally Pfister's cinematography, as well as all the other technical nominations with the exception of sound editing.
The Dark Knight, Richard King.
And the last but not least, one of the most important wins in the history of the Academy Awards.
And the Oscar goes to Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight.
Was Heath Ledger's posthumous win of the Best Supporting Actor for playing the Joker.
Tonight we are choosing to celebrate and be happy for what he has achieved.
Do you like our work? Let us know with your like and comment. Push that subscribe button and share with your friends. If you want to support the project financially, become our sponsor on Patreon or YouTube sponsorship. Thank you.